Dear fellow truth seekers, this is the last video concerning myth-telling from around the world that are somewhat similar to the Abrahamic religious stories that are important for our religious comparison study. Kindly watch the video that I have uploaded last week entitled Video number 50, Australian and Oceanian Mythologies, for the first part of this particular myth. In that video, I have shared about the creation of the world according to the Hawaiian people. Now, I will continue with more myths from Hawaii that are surprisingly very similar to Abrahamic religious stories. In the Hawaiian myth, there was a story about the survivor of the Great Flood called Nu, similar to the biblical Noah. And the story continues as follows. Luanu searched a place to sacrifice. Luanu was the 10th descendant of Nu, like the biblical Abraham was the 10th descendant of Noah. The legend adds that by command of his God, he was the first to introduce circumcision as a practice amongst his descendants. He left his native home and moved a long way off until he reached a land called Honua Ilalo, the southern country. Luanu was the father of Ku Nawau by his slave woman and of Kalani Menehune by his wife, just like Abraham had two sons called Ishmael and Isaac. Another says that the god Kane ordered Luanu to go up on a mountain and perform a sacrifice there. Luanu looked among the mountains, but none of them appeared suitable for the purpose. Then Luanu inquired of God where he might find a proper place. God showed him where to go, so he went eastward as per instructed. Luanu, through his grandson, Kinilau Amano, like Jacob, Abraham's grandson, became the ancestor of the 12 children of the latter and the original founder of the Menehune people, from whom this legend makes the Polynesian family descend. Waiku and his 10 sons. The Reverend Sheldon Dibble, in History of the Sandwich Islands, published at Lahaina Luna in 1843, gives another tradition, which very much resembles the story of the biblical Joseph. Waikele Nuiaku was one of the 10 brethren who had one sister. They were all the children of one father, whose name was Waiku. Waikele Nuiaku was much beloved by his father, but his brethren hated him. On account of their hatred, they carried him and cast him into a pit belonging to Holo Naiole. The oldest brother had pity on him and gave charge to Holo Naiole to take good care of him. Waikele Nuiaku escaped and fled to a country over which reigned over a king whose name was Kamohoali. There he was thrown into a dark place, a pit underground, in which many persons were confined for various crimes. Whilst confined in this dark place, he told his companions to dream dreams and tell them to him. The night following, 4 of the prisoners had dreams. The first dreamt that he saw a ripe ohia, native apple, and his spirit ate it. The second dreamt that he saw a ripe banana, and again his spirit ate it. The third dreamt that he saw a hog. Again his spirit ate. The fourth dreamt that he saw awa, pressed out the juice, and his spirit drank it. The first 3 dreams pertaining to food, Waikele Nuiaku interpreted unfavorably, telling the dreamers they must prepare to die. The fourth dream, pertaining to drink, he interpreted to signify deliverance and life. The first 3 dreamers were slain according to the interpretation, and the fourth was delivered and saved. Afterwards, this last dreamer told Kamohoali, the king of the land, how wonderful was the skill of Waikele Nuiaku in interpreting dreams, and the king sent and delivered him from prison and made him a principal chief in his kingdom. The legend of Pele and Hi'iaka. And here is a myth about the resurrection of a person by a goddess. This is a love story, but if you listen carefully, I believe you can see some similarities with a number of Abrahamic religious stories, although heavily jumbled up. And therefore, I believe this is significant for our religious comparison study. Pele was a fire goddess. She was born of the female spirit Haumea. She had a sister called Hi'iaka, the patron goddess of Hawaii and hula dancers. In another version, Hi'iaka was brought to Hawaii by Pele in the form of an egg. Hi'iaka has a task of bearing the clouds, those of storms and those produced by her sister's volcanoes. One day, Pele fell into a deep sleep and left her body to wander, and was lured by the sound of a hula drum accompanied by a wonderful voice. She appeared in spirit at a festival on Kauai, where she fell in love with a singer, a young chief named Lohiau. Pele's sister Hi'iaka had been watching over Pele's body, and after 9 days she grew worried and sang an incantation to bring Pele back. Upon her return, Pele longed for Lohiau and decided to send a messenger to bring him to her. Hi'iaka volunteered to go on the dangerous journey, as long as Pele would protect her sacred grove of lehua trees and her friend Hopoe. Pele agreed to Hi'iaka's request, but insisted that she return with Lohiau within 40 days. She also instructed Hi'iaka not to fall in love with Lohiau, or even embrace him. Hi'iaka's journey was filled with many adventures, such as dueling with the kupua, demons of the island forest, but when at last she reached Kauai, she found that the young chief had died from longing for Pele. She was able to resurrect him with chanting and prayer, but she was not able to return to Pele within 40 days. Pele, fearing that Hi'iaka had betrayed her and was keeping the handsome chief for herself, became enraged and not only destroyed Hi'iaka's sacred lehua forest, but also killed Hopoe, turning her into stone. When Hi'iaka returned, seeing her friend dead and her forest ravaged, she took revenge on Pele and embraced Lohiau. In retaliation, Pele sent waves of lava at the couple. Hi'iaka was unharmed, but Lohiau was killed by the lava. Again, Hi'iaka resurrected him, thus bringing him back to life twice. Pele, regretting her actions toward Hi'iaka's forest and friend, decided to let Lohiau choose who he wanted to be with. Some versions of the legend say that Lohiau chose Hi'iaka over Pele and returned with her to Kauai. Others say he decided to remain with both of them. Still, others say that he retreated to Kauai alone. There is another story about Pele and the great primordial flood, although Pele somehow has a different mother, father, and lover or husband. This story is telling how the islands of Hawaii emerged after the great flood. This is a little different than the story of the biblical Noah. I just found it interesting how the Hawaiian also believed that once there was a flood so high that only the mountains remained above water. If this story stood alone, I would not have thought further about it, but considering how many other Hawaiian legends that are clearly very similar to Abrahamic religious stories, I decided to include it here. So here is the story. Kahinali was the mother of Pele. Kanehualani was her father, and her two brothers were Kamohuali and Kahuai Laukalani. Pele was born in the land of Hapakuela, a far distant land at the edge of the sky, toward the southwest. There she lived with her parents until she was grown up. Then she married Wahialoa, and to this were born a daughter named Laka and a son named Menehune. But after a time, Pele's husband Wahialoa was enticed away from her by Pele Kumulani. The deserted Pele, being much displeased and troubled in mind on account of her husband, started on her travels in search of him, and came in the direction of the Hawaiian Islands. Now, at that time these islands were a vast waste. There was no sea, nor was there any fresh water. When Pele set out on her journey, her parents gave her the sea to go with her and bear her canoes onward. So she sailed forward, flood-borne by the sea, until she reached the land of Pakuela, and thence onward to the land of Kanaloa. From her head she poured forth the sea as she went. But the waters of the sea continued to rise until only the highest points of the great mountains, Haleakala, Mauna Kea, and Mauna Loa, were visible. All else was covered, flooded by the water. Afterward, the sea receded until it reached its present level. This event is called the Kaya Kahinali, Sea of Kahinali, because it was from Kahinali, her mother, that Pele received the gift of the sea, and she herself brought it to Hawaii. And from that time to this, Pele and her family forsook their former land of Hapakuela and have dwelt in Hawaii Nei, Pele coming first and the rest following at a later time. Why are there so many similar religious stories and mythologies around the world? Are they really merely copying or borrowing from one another? If yes, then how and when did they do that? I will share my own analysis, which I believe is quite different than any other theories that you might have heard before. Now that I have shared all the stories and myths that I know of that are similar to one another, be they religious or myth from around the world, it is time to analyze them deeper. However, we also need to analyze our modern scientific theories too. How correct are these theories? Next week, before I go to the scientific section, I will summarize briefly and pose questions to all the stories and myths that I have shared with you so far. Herewith, I'm ending this video. Thank you for watching and hope to see you next week.